Maya Thompson, an 8-year-old with bright eyes and a hopeful smile, stepped onto the yellow school bus for the first time in her new neighborhood. Her mother, Sarah, waved goodbye, her heart filled with dreams of a better future for her family. But as the bus doors closed, neither of them could have imagined the sinister journey that lay ahead. Mr. Benson, the gray-haired bus driver with a grandfatherly demeanor, harbored something sinister behind his friendly facade. His welcoming smile concealed a dark truth that would soon cast a shadow over young Maya's life in ways her parents could never have anticipated. As days turned into weeks, Sarah's maternal instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. In a predominantly white neighborhood, her growing fears about Mr. Benson, a long-standing bus driver respected by the community, seemed impossible to voice without risking disbelief or worse. What unspeakable acts were happening on that school bus, and how could one mother's determination to protect her child become the catalyst for exposing a community's shocking secrets? Before we dive into this gripping tale of courage and justice, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this shocking story, don't forget to subscribe. Bookmark. The warmth of a late summer breeze swept through the Johnson family's new neighborhood, rustling the thick green leaves of the tall oak tree in front of their new home. As the moving truck rumbled down the quiet street, leaving them in its wake, the three of them, Nina, her husband Malcolm, and their daughter Maya, stood together on the front lawn of their modest 2-story house. Maya, an energetic 8-year-old with a head of dark curls and lively brown eyes, shifted on her feet, unable to contain her curiosity as she took in her unfamiliar surroundings. Nina, gently resting a hand on her daughter's shoulder, asked softly, "So what do you think, honey?" Her voice held a mix of eagerness and a hint of anxiety. Maya tilted her head, studying the tree towering over them. After a pause, she replied thoughtfully, "It's different, but I like it. Can we put a swing on that big branch over there?" Nina chuckled, some of her own tension easing as she looked at her daughter's hopeful expression. "We'll see," she replied warmly. "Maybe once we're settled in a bit." Just then, Malcolm joined them, wiping sweat from his brow. "All right," he announced. "That's the last of the boxes." He looked around with a satisfied smile. "How about we order some pizza and call it a day?" With enthusiasm, the family stepped into their new home together. As they entered, they noticed a few curious glances from the neighbors. They were, after all, the only black family on the street, maybe even the whole neighborhood. Later that evening, surrounded by moving boxes and perched on the living room floor, the Johnsons shared their pizza around a makeshift cardboard table. Malcolm raised his slice in a light-hearted toast. "To new beginnings," he declared with warmth in his voice. "To new beginnings," Nina echoed, touching her crust to his with a soft smile. Maya joined in, giggling as their pizza slices met with a soft clink. As they ate, their conversation shifted to the dreams they had for this new chapter in their lives. Nina's eyes sparkled as she talked about setting up her home office. "No more long commutes for me," she said happily. "I'll finally be able to focus on my design work here at home." Malcolm nodded proudly, knowing how hard she'd worked to build her career. "And I know you'll knock them off their feet," he said, thinking of his own new job at the firm in the city. The drive would be long, but he was hopeful the opportunity would be worth it. Maya joined in eagerly. "What about my new school? Do you think I'll make friends?" Her voice held a mixture of excitement and apprehension that made her parents exchange a thoughtful glance. "Of course you will, sweetheart," Nina assured her, giving her daughter a reassuring smile. "You're smart, kind, and funny. The other kids will love you." Malcolm added, "Just be yourself, Maya. That's all you ever need to do." As they laughed and dreamed together, a small undercurrent of worry lingered. Moving to a mostly white neighborhood wasn't a decision they'd made lightly, but it was one they believed would bring a brighter future for Maya. Over late-night discussions and careful planning, they weighed the potential challenges against the opportunities. "This move is for Maya," Malcolm had said one night, looking at his wife with a mixture of resolve and hope. "Better schools, safer streets. She deserves every chance we can give her." Nina had agreed wholeheartedly, but now, surrounded by boxes and facing an unknown neighborhood, a flicker of anxiety bubbled up in her chest. Would they truly be accepted here? Would Maya feel as at home as they'd hoped? As if sensing her mother's concern, Maya snuggled close to Nina, resting her small hand on her mother's arm. "I'm glad we're all here together," she said simply, her innocent words dissolving some of her mother's worry. Nina gave her daughter's hand a gentle squeeze, her heart swelling with love. "Me too, baby. Me too." That evening, the Johnsons stayed up late, unpacking essentials and getting ready for what lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring big changes, Malcolm's first day at his new firm, and, most importantly, Maya's first day at her new school. When bedtime finally rolled around, Nina tucked Maya into bed, smoothing her daughter's hair and looking into her eyes. "Are you excited about tomorrow?" she asked. Maya nodded, her eyes wide. "A little nervous too," she admitted. "That's perfectly okay," Nina reassured her. "It's normal to feel nervous about new things, but remember, you're brave and strong. You've got this." Maya smiled, seeming comforted by her mother's words. "Thanks, Mom. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams." Closing Maya's door quietly, Nina leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. She whispered a silent hope that tomorrow would be the beginning of something wonderful for all of them, especially for Maya. In their bedroom, she found Malcolm already in bed, scrolling through his phone as he double-checked his route to work. "Looking up the way again?" she teased as she climbed in beside him. Malcolm nodded, putting his phone down with a laugh. "Don't want to get lost on my first day." He turned to her, more serious now. "How's Maya? Nervous?" Nina nodded. "She is, but she'll be okay." "And how about you?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her. Nina sighed, nestling into his embrace. "Same. Nervous but excited." After a pause, she added softly, "I just really hope we made the right choice, Malcolm." He hugged her tightly, his voice warm with reassurance. "We did. It might take time, but we're together. We can face anything as long as we have each other." As they drifted off to sleep, the house settled around them, its creaks and sighs echoing the family's quiet hopes. Outside, under the twinkling stars, their new neighborhood lay waiting, full of both promise and unknown challenges. Bookmark. Early morning sunlight crept across the Johnsons' driveway as Nina, Malcolm, and Maya gathered outside, waiting for the school bus. Malcolm had left for work a little earlier, but he made it back just in time for Maya's first day at her new school. Maya stood between her parents, clutching her brand-new backpack, her eyes darting nervously up and down the quiet suburban street. Nina bent down, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "Did you remember your lunch?" she asked, smoothing Maya's hair for what seemed like the 10th time. Maya nodded, patting her backpack with confidence. "Got it, Mom. And my notebook and pencils." Malcolm crouched down to her level, meeting her eyes with a warm smile. "That's my girl," he said, his voice soft and encouraging. "Now remember what we talked about, okay?" Maya's expression turned serious as she recited back to him. "Be me, be kind, and if anything makes me uncomfortable, tell a teacher or you guys right away." Malcolm gave her a proud smile, pulling her in for a quick hug. "You got this, champ." Just then, the low rumble of an engine caught their attention. The bright yellow school bus rounded the corner, and Nina felt her heart skip a beat. This was the moment they had all been both anticipating and slightly dreading. As the bus came to a stop, its doors swung open with a metallic creak, revealing a middle-aged driver with graying hair and a neutral expression. He looked down at them for a moment, his face flickering with surprise before settling into a polite, if distant, expression. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice flat. "You must be new to the route." Nina smiled, though her nerves made it feel a bit forced. "Yes, we just moved in. This is Maya, our daughter." The driver, who introduced himself as Mr. Miller, nodded, his tone polite but unenthusiastic. "Welcome aboard, Maya." Maya hesitated, casting a quick, uncertain glance back at her parents. Nina gave her an encouraging nod, while Malcolm whispered, "You've got this, sweetheart." Taking a deep breath, Maya climbed the steps onto the bus. Nina and Malcolm caught a quick glimpse of the other children. Some looked curious, a few smiled, but a couple had expressions that made Nina's stomach twist slightly. As the bus pulled away, its rumbling engine fading into the distance, Nina and Malcolm stood hand in hand, watching until it disappeared around the corner. "She'll be fine," Malcolm said, giving Nina's hand a reassuring squeeze. But the trace of doubt in his voice echoed the worry she felt in her own heart. The day felt impossibly long for Nina, her mind constantly drifting back to Maya. She tried to focus on setting up her home office, unpacking boxes, and getting her workspace in order, but her thoughts kept returning to her daughter. Questions filled her mind. Was Maya settling in? Were her classmates friendly? Did she feel out of place? When the familiar sound of the bus engine finally reached her ears that afternoon, Nina hurried to the door, her heart pounding. As she stepped outside, she saw Maya bounding down the bus steps, her backpack bouncing, a broad smile lighting up her face. "Hi, Mom," Maya called, waving as she ran up the driveway. Relief washed over Nina as she enveloped her daughter in a hug. "Hi, sweetie. How was your first day?" Maya's face practically glowed with excitement as she shared stories of her nice teacher, the friendly girl she'd met at lunch, and the cool playground equipment they had at recess. Nina listened eagerly, her own worries melting away with every word. It sounded like Maya had had a positive day, just as they'd hoped. That evening, as they all gathered around the dinner table, Maya continued to regale them with stories from her day. Malcolm, home from his first day at his new job, asked questions, laughing at Maya's animated descriptions. As the conversation slowed, Maya looked down at her plate, her expression turning thoughtful. "Our bus driver is kind of rude," she said suddenly, almost as if testing the waters. Nina and Malcolm exchanged a surprised glance. "What do you mean, honey?" Nina asked, her tone careful. Maya shrugged, shifting uncomfortably in her seat. "He just says mean things sometimes," she murmured. She quickly changed the subject, asking her dad about his new office, her smile back in place. But Nina couldn't shake the concerned look Malcolm gave her over Maya's head. They chose not to push her on it, not wanting to dampen the excitement of her otherwise happy first day. Later that night, once Maya was asleep, Nina and Malcolm talked quietly in their bedroom. "What do you think she meant about the bus driver?" Malcolm asked, worry evident in his voice. Nina sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed as she folded a pair of pajamas. "I don't know. Maybe he's just gruff, you know? Some people aren't exactly warm, especially when it comes to their job. But it could be something more." Malcolm ran a hand through his hair, his expression thoughtful. "Should we ask her more about it? Or are we overreacting?" Nina shook her head. "Not yet. Let's give it a few days and see if she mentions anything else. I don't want to make her anxious if it's nothing." Malcolm nodded, though his forehead remained creased with worry. She could feel the same uncertainty in herself, that lingering sense that something was just a little off. But for now, all they could do was wait and watch, hoping that there was no real cause for concern. As they lay in bed that night, Nina found herself staring at the ceiling, the faint sound of Maya's words echoing in her mind. "He just says mean things sometimes." What kind of mean things was her daughter talking about? And why was she suddenly so quick to change the subject? These questions lingered in her thoughts, refusing to let her sleep. The following morning came. Gray clouds hanging over the neighborhood, and with it, a sense of unease that Nina couldn't quite shake. She glanced out the window as Maya boarded the bus again, giving her a reassuring wave as Mr. Miller closed the doors behind her. This time, he didn't even look down to acknowledge them. As the bus pulled away, Nina found herself standing at the window longer than usual, her mind heavy with a strange mix of worry and determination. Something told her that she'd need to keep a closer eye on things, that maybe Maya's brief comment was just the beginning of something they couldn't yet see. The days that followed seemed to slip into a familiar rhythm. But beneath the surface, Nina's unease continued to grow. Each morning, she watched Maya board the bus, her eyes following the yellow vehicle as it disappeared down the street. She tried to focus on her work, setting up her home office and organizing her design projects, but her mind often drifted to Maya and her new school. At first, everything seemed normal enough. Maya would come home in the afternoons, sometimes bubbling with excitement about a new friend she'd made or an activity they'd done in class. But as the days wore on, Nina noticed a subtle change in her daughter's behavior. The bubbly, talkative girl who had eagerly shared every detail of her first day at school now gave only short, vague answers when asked about her day. Instead of her usual enthusiastic chatter, she would shrug and say, "It was fine," or "Nothing really happened." Her energy seemed to have dimmed, and she spent more time quietly playing by herself or staring out the window. One afternoon, Nina took a break from her work and found Maya sitting by the living room window, her gaze distant as she watched the leaves fluttering in the yard. "Maya?" Nina called softly, moving to sit beside her. "Is everything okay?" Maya blinked as if pulling herself from deep thoughts. She looked up at her mom and forced a small smile. "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine." Nina gave her a gentle hug, sensing something unspoken lingering in her daughter's eyes. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? If something's bothering you, at school or with friends, or anything else?" Maya nodded, leaning into her mother's side. But she said nothing, her gaze returning to the window, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the arm of the couch. That evening, after Malcolm arrived home, Nina brought up her concerns. They sat together in the kitchen while Malcolm unpacked the groceries he'd picked up on his way home. "Malcolm, I'm worried about Maya," Nina began, her voice hushed. "She's been acting different. She doesn't talk about school much anymore. She's quiet, and I've caught her just staring out the window, lost in thought." Malcolm's brow furrowed, and he paused, looking up from the bag of apples in his hand. "Do you think she's just adjusting to the new school? It's a big change, and maybe she just needs a little time." "I thought so too at first," Nina admitted, her eyes troubled. "But I keep thinking about what she said the other night, about the bus driver, that he was mean and rude. I wonder if something's going on during those bus rides. But whenever I try to talk to her about it, she shuts down." Malcolm nodded thoughtfully, setting down the apples and taking her hand. "You're probably right to be concerned," he admitted. "I'll keep an eye out too, and we can see if she mentions anything else. But let's be careful not to jump to conclusions. Maybe he's just not a friendly guy." Nina sighed, nodding, though her heart still felt heavy with worry. She hoped Malcolm was right and that Maya's silence was just a phase. But her instincts told her there was more beneath the surface. That night, after tucking Maya into bed, Nina lingered by her daughter's door, watching her drift off to sleep. Maya looked peaceful. Her small face relaxed as she snuggled under her blanket, but the shadow of worry remained in Nina's mind. Was Maya hiding something? She wondered, and if so, why didn't she feel safe enough to share it? Over the next few days, Nina watched her daughter closely, hoping for any clue that might help her understand what was bothering her. She noticed small changes in Maya's demeanor. She no longer talked about the friends she'd made, and her once bright excitement for school seemed to have faded. One evening, after Malcolm had left for a late meeting, Nina decided to try bringing up the topic of the bus driver again. She sat down next to Maya on the couch, casually asking about her day. "How was school today, sweetie?" she asked, keeping her tone light. "Fine," Maya mumbled, her gaze fixed on the television. She fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, avoiding eye contact. Nina took a breath, then gently ventured, "Hey, remember a few days ago when you mentioned that the bus driver was rude? Has anything like that happened again?" Maya stiffened slightly, her small hands tightening on the fabric of her shirt. She glanced up at her mother, her eyes wide and a little fearful. "It's nothing, Mommy," she insisted, her voice quivering just enough for Nina to notice. "Really? Can I go play in my room?" Nina's heart ached as she watched her daughter pull away, retreating to the safety of her bedroom. She wanted to reach out, to hold Maya and reassure her that she was safe, that she could share anything. But something was clearly holding her back, and Nina didn't want to push her daughter further away. When Malcolm returned home later that night, Nina shared her observations. As they prepared dinner together, she described Maya's withdrawn behavior and her unsuccessful attempts to get her daughter to open up. Malcolm listened, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. "Nina," he began carefully, "I get that you're worried, but maybe you're reading too much into this. Maya is just getting used to a new school, a new home. It's a lot for a kid her age." "But Malcolm," Nina argued, frustration rising in her voice, "I can see it. She's not the same. She's not just adjusting, she's scared, and I can't shake the feeling that it has something to do with that bus driver." Malcolm sighed, running a hand over his face. "Look, I know you're concerned, but I've got a lot on my plate too. Work's been intense, and I don't have the energy to worry about something that might be nothing. Let's give it a little more time before we start jumping to conclusions." His words stung, and Nina turned away, hurt and feeling alone in her concern. She had hoped Malcolm would share her worries, that he'd help her find a way to ease Maya's fears. But instead, his dismissal left her feeling unsupported, as though her concerns were unwarranted. Malcolm quickly noticed the tension in her expression, guilt flickering across his face. He softened his tone, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Nina. I didn't mean to make light of your feelings. I know you're just trying to look out for her." But despite his apology, the weight of doubt remained heavy on Nina's heart. She spent the rest of the evening in quiet reflection, her mind racing with thoughts of Maya's strange behavior, the bus driver's cold demeanor, and the possibility that something more troubling was going on. As they lay in bed that night, both silent and lost in their own thoughts, Nina couldn't shake the feeling that her maternal instincts were trying to tell her something important. What if she was right? What if Maya really was facing something hurtful or frightening on those bus rides? In the dim light of early morning, Nina made a decision. If no one else would take her concerns seriously, she would have to find out the truth herself. Tomorrow, she would follow the school bus, watch Maya from a distance, and finally uncover what was really going on. With this resolve, she drifted into a restless sleep, unaware of the events that would soon unfold. Events that would forever change their lives in ways she could never have anticipated. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, mirroring Nina's heavy mood. Malcolm had already left for work, the tension from their disagreement the night before lingering in the air. As Nina helped Maya get ready for school, her mind buzzed with determination and a touch of anxiety. Today, she would do what she felt was necessary. She would follow the bus. As Maya clambered onto the school bus, Nina forced a bright smile and waved goodbye, her heart pounding with worry and purpose. She waited until the bus was out of sight before grabbing her keys, throwing on a light jacket, and heading to her car. Her hands trembled as she started the ignition, glancing nervously over her shoulder to make sure none of her neighbors were watching. She didn't want to arouse suspicion or seem paranoid, but she had to know what was going on. Following the bus at a safe distance, Nina tried to keep her nerves under control. What if Malcolm was right? What if she was overreacting? But her gut told her otherwise. She'd seen the way Maya's shoulders hunched when she mentioned Mr. Miller, the unease in her daughter's eyes whenever the subject of the bus came up. The bus made its usual stops, picking up children from various points along the route. Nina couldn't help but notice that Maya was often the last to board, even when other kids were already waiting at the same stop. It struck her as strange, but she brushed it off as she continued following. At one point, as Maya climbed the steps, Nina thought she saw Mr. Miller lean down and say something to her. Maya's shoulders tensed and she hesitated for a split second before moving to her seat. Nina's heart sank, but from her distance she couldn't make out what was said. She only knew that Maya seemed smaller somehow, like she was shrinking under the weight of something invisible yet heavy. When they finally reached the school, Nina parked across the street, watching as the children disembarked. Mr. Miller, his graying hair clearly visible even from a distance, helped each child off the bus with a neutral expression. When it was Maya's turn, he even placed a hand on her shoulder, smiling as he ushered her off. From the outside he seemed perfectly professional, kind, even. A confusing wave of relief and bewilderment washed over her. Could I really be wrong? She wondered. Maybe he's just a gruff person with a harmless demeanor? Or maybe? But the questions wouldn't settle, and neither would her heart. What if he'd noticed her following and was changing his behavior accordingly? Nina drove home with a troubled mind, struggling to reconcile what she'd seen with what she felt. She hadn't witnessed any clear mistreatment, but her gut still whispered that something wasn't right. When she arrived home, she tried to focus on her work, replying to emails and finishing a design project, but her thoughts kept returning to Maya's face, her tense shoulders, and the driver's mysterious attitude. Eventually, Nina decided not to mention her impromptu stakeout to Malcolm, at least not yet. She knew how he'd react, likely brushing it off as her imagination ran wild. She needed more proof, something tangible to justify her worries. When Maya returned home that afternoon, Nina greeted her with a warm smile, doing her best to act casual. "How was school today, sweetie?" Maya shrugged her usual response these days. "It was fine," she mumbled, dropping her backpack and making her way to her room without another word. Nina's heart ached as she watched her daughter retreat. The disconnect between them felt like a wall she couldn't seem to break through. She knew Maya was struggling, but without her daughter's trust, Nina felt helpless. Still, she was more determined than ever to figure out what was really going on. That evening, while they sat down for dinner, Nina observed Maya closely, watching for any hint of distress. Maya barely touched her food, pushing it around her plate in silence. When Malcolm asked about her day, she offered only brief answers, her gaze averted, her energy subdued. After dinner, as Malcolm cleared the table, Nina decided to broach the subject again. "Malcolm, I followed the bus today," she confessed, her voice low but steady. "I wanted to see for myself what was going on." Malcolm paused, his hand hovering over the sink as he processed her words. He turned, eyebrows raised in surprise. "You followed the bus?" Nina nodded, bracing herself for his reaction. "I needed to know if I was just imagining things, or if there was something real going on. I wanted to protect Maya." Malcolm sighed, shaking his head. "Nina, don't you think that's a bit extreme? Following the bus? What are you going to do next? Stake out her school?" "I'm serious, Malcolm," Nina replied, her voice strained. "Maya is changing. She's not the same girl who was so excited about school. She's quiet, withdrawn, and scared. I know it has something to do with that bus ride." Malcolm scrubbed a hand over his face, clearly torn between concern and frustration. "I get that you're worried, but this is starting to feel like an obsession, Nina. She's just adjusting. She's probably dealing with the usual nerves kids have when they start at a new school." Nina's frustration flared. "I can't believe you're still dismissing this. I'm her mother. I can feel that something is wrong. Why can't you take me seriously?" The room fell silent, tension thick between them. Malcolm softened, seeing the hurt in her eyes. "Nina," he said gently, "I'm not trying to dismiss your feelings. I just think we might be letting our own fears cloud our judgment. We're in a new place, yes, and things are different, but maybe Maya just needs us to give her some space." Nina turned away, her heart heavy. She felt like she was fighting alone, her fears brushed aside, her instincts dismissed. But she couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that something was happening to Maya, something that went beyond the typical adjustment struggles. Malcolm noticed her distress and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Nina," he murmured. "I didn't mean to upset you. Let's try to be there for Maya without jumping to conclusions. She needs us both." But as Nina lay awake that night, her mind refused to let go of her suspicions. Malcolm's words had done little to ease her worries, and she couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away, that every day they waited was another day. Maya suffered in silence. The next morning, Nina made another decision. This time, she would do more than just observe. If Maya wouldn't open up to her, maybe she could learn more from someone else in the neighborhood. That afternoon, she took Maya to the park after school, hoping the fresh air and sunshine might lighten her daughter's spirits. While Maya played on the swings, Nina spotted one of her neighbors sitting on a nearby bench. She recognized the woman as Sarah, someone she'd seen around the neighborhood but hadn't yet met. Nina took a deep breath and approached her, forcing a friendly smile. "Hi, I'm Nina," she introduced herself, extending a hand. "We moved in down the street a couple of weeks ago." Sarah looked up, her face shifting from polite surprise to a guarded expression. She shook Nina's hand reluctantly. "I'm Sarah," she replied. "Nice to meet you." The two women chatted briefly, exchanging small talk about the neighborhood and the challenges of moving to a new place. Nina's anxiety eased slightly, grateful for the opportunity to connect. She hesitated but then gathered the courage to bring up what had been weighing on her mind. "Sarah," she began cautiously, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but I was wondering if you know much about the school bus driver, Mr. Miller. My daughter mentioned that he's, well, a bit rude. I'm a little concerned about how he treats the kids." Sarah's face immediately darkened. The warmth vanished, replaced by an expression of anger and disdain. She leaned in, her voice low, but filled with barely contained hostility. "How dare you?" she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "How dare you come into this neighborhood and accuse Mr. Miller of anything? He's been driving the kids in this community for years. He's a good man." Nina was taken aback, stumbling over her words. I didn't mean to accuse him of anything. I was just concerned about my daughter." Sarah cut her off, her voice laced with bitterness. "You just moved here, and already you're causing trouble, thinking you know everything. If you don't like it, you're free to leave. Honestly, it would probably be better for everyone here if you did." Nina felt the sting of Sarah's words like a physical blow. She'd anticipated that not everyone in the neighborhood would be welcoming, but the raw hostility in Sarah's voice left her feeling shaken. Beneath the surface of Sarah's anger, Nina recognized a deeper sentiment, an unspoken message. "You don't belong here." I'm sorry," Nina stammered, her face flushing as she rose from the bench. "I didn't mean to offend anyone." "Maybe you should teach your daughter to show some respect," Sarah spat, her voice icy, "instead of making up stories about decent people." Without another word, Sarah turned and stalked away, leaving Nina standing alone, her mind whirling from the encounter. Across the playground, Maya had stopped swinging, her wide eyes fixed on her mother. Nina forced herself to smile, hoping to hide the turmoil she felt. As they walked home, her thoughts churned with disbelief and anger. If Sarah's reaction was any indication of the neighborhood's attitude, how could Maya feel safe here? More importantly, how could she get anyone to take her concerns seriously if they were dismissed so harshly? That night, after Maya went to bed, Nina sat alone in the living room, turning the day's events over in her mind. She hadn't told Malcolm about her conversation with Sarah. She couldn't bear the thought of him dismissing her concerns again. But her resolve had only grown stronger. If no one else would take her seriously, she would investigate further on her own. With a new sense of determination, she made a silent promise. She would find out what was happening to Maya, no matter what it took. Little did she know, her search for answers would soon plunge their family into a crisis they couldn't have anticipated, one that would forever alter the course of their lives. The weeks following Nina's tense encounter with Sarah were filled with an uneasy calm. Though Nina tried to focus on her work and daily routines, her thoughts remained fixed on Maya, who seemed to be getting quieter and more withdrawn each day. Every time she tried to gently bring up how things were going at school or ask about Mr. Miller, Maya would brush it off, insisting everything was fine. But Nina could see through her daughter's guarded smile, and her instincts told her that this was far from the truth. One gray afternoon, Nina spotted Maya sitting by the window, watching the street with a distant look in her eyes. Her heart twisted at the sight. Her once bubbly daughter now looked as though she were carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders. Nina approached quietly, resting a gentle hand on Maya's back. "Hey, sweetie," she said softly. "You know, if something's bothering you, you can always talk to me. I'm here to listen, no matter what." Maya hesitated, her small hands fidgeting in her lap. For a brief moment, Nina thought her daughter might finally open up, but just as quickly, the moment passed. Maya forced a small smile, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I'm okay, Mom," she murmured. "Can I go play in my room?" Nina nodded, her heart aching as she watched Maya retreat down the hallway. She knew her daughter was hiding something, but every attempt to reach her seemed to push her further away. That evening, when Malcolm arrived home, Nina shared her concerns. She described how quiet Maya had become, her reserved answers, and the sense of dread that hung over her like a dark cloud. Malcolm listened, his brow furrowed as he absorbed her words. "Nina," he said carefully, "I understand you're worried, but I think you're letting your imagination run wild. We're new here, Maya's adjusting, and yes, it's a big change for all of us, but maybe she just needs time." Nina's frustration bubbled up, a mix of helplessness and fear. "Malcolm, I know what I'm seeing," she replied, her voice barely concealing her anger. "This isn't just about adjusting. Something's wrong. And if you're not willing to help me figure it out, then I'll have to do it myself." Malcolm sighed, reaching out to place a hand on her shoulder. "Look, I'm not saying you're wrong. I think maybe we need to give her some space. She'll come to us when she's ready." But Nina could tell that Malcolm didn't truly understand the depths of her fear. And so, as they fell into a tense silence, she made up her mind. If no one else would take her seriously, she would find answers on her own. A few days later, while Maya was at school, Nina decided to visit the local park, where many neighborhood parents and children gathered after school. She hoped to talk to more parents, maybe hear if they'd had similar experiences or noticed anything unusual with Mr. Miller. Part of her felt embarrassed, as if she were grasping at straws, but she was willing to do whatever it took. As she walked through the park, she spotted a familiar face. Sarah, the same neighbor who'd lashed out at her weeks before, was sitting on a bench scrolling through her phone. Taking a deep breath, Nina approached her, hoping that maybe after a little time had passed, Sarah might be more receptive. "Hi, Sarah," Nina greeted cautiously, forcing a polite smile. Sarah looked up, her expression stiff and guarded. "Hello, Nina," she replied, her tone cool. Nina took a seat beside her, trying to mask her unease. "I just wanted to talk for a moment. I know we didn't get off on the right foot last time, and I apologize if I offended you. I'm just trying to look out for my daughter, and I'm worried." Sarah's face hardened, and she shook her head slowly. "I don't know what you're expecting to hear from me," she said curtly. "We don't take kindly to people coming into our neighborhood, stirring up trouble, and accusing good, hard-working people of things they'd never do." Nina felt her cheeks flush, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm not trying to accuse anyone," she insisted. "I just want to know if you or any of the other parents have noticed anything unusual. My daughter mentioned the bus driver, Mr. Miller, being rude. I'm just trying to understand if there's more to it." Sarah narrowed her eyes, her voice cold and laced with contempt. "Let me make something clear to you, Nina," she said, her tone low but pointed. "Mr. Miller has been a part of this community for years. People trust him with their children. And you? You come here looking for problems that don't exist, and then try to drag the rest of us into it." Nina's mouth went dry. She could feel the weight of Sarah's hostility, the thinly veiled implication that she and her family didn't belong. Before she could respond, Sarah continued, her voice dripping with bitterness. "Maybe you should think twice about causing trouble. And if you're so uncomfortable here, you're always free to leave. I think everyone here would agree it might be for the best." With that, Sarah stood, giving Nina one final contemptuous glance before walking away. Nina sat frozen, her mind racing. She hadn't anticipated this level of hostility. She knew that being the only black family in the neighborhood might bring challenges, but Sarah's anger felt like a slap in the face, a reminder that no matter how hard they tried, they might never be truly accepted here. Nina felt a sinking sensation in her stomach as she watched Sarah walk away. If Sarah's reaction was any indication, then getting help from others in the neighborhood was unlikely, if not impossible. Worse, it confirmed her growing fear that her family was not truly welcome here, that her worries would be dismissed, her voice ignored. When she and Maya returned home that evening, Nina sat alone in the living room, reflecting on the day's events. She hadn't told Malcolm about her encounter with Sarah. She knew he would only tell her to let it go, to avoid ruffling feathers. But now, more than ever, she felt determined to get to the bottom of what was happening. If she couldn't rely on the neighbors for support, she would have to rely on her own instincts. The next morning, Nina noticed that Maya seemed especially quiet, her shoulders hunched, as she climbed onto the school bus. Watching her daughter disappear behind the bus doors, Nina's heart ached with the need to protect her, to keep her safe. She couldn't shake the feeling that Maya's sadness and withdrawn behavior were linked to the bus rides and Mr. Miller's presence. And if her daughter wouldn't confide in her, she would have to find another way to help. Her mind buzzed with a new idea. Perhaps she could observe Mr. Miller when he wasn't aware he was being watched. Maybe she could follow the bus for a few more days, find a way to talk to other children who rode it, or even try to reach out to the school itself. When Maya came home from school that afternoon, Nina attempted to engage her daughter in conversation again, hoping for any clue that might shed light on what was going on. "How was school, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Maya shrugged, her face blank. "It was fine," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Nina knelt down, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Are you sure? You seem different, Maya. You know you can tell me anything, right?" For a moment, Maya's lower lip trembled and Nina saw a flicker of something in her daughter's eyes. Fear, sadness, something she couldn't quite place. But then Maya pulled away, plastering on a forced smile. "I'm fine, Mom," she insisted. "Can I go play in my room?" Watching her daughter walk away, Nina felt the ache in her heart grow. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Maya was holding something back, something that weighed heavily on her small shoulders. And even though she felt as though every attempt to reach her was failing, Nina knew she couldn't stop trying. That night, after Malcolm had gone to bed, Nina sat alone in the dimly lit living room, her mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, frustration, sadness, and most of all, fear. She replayed every conversation she'd had with Maya, every small sign of her daughter's discomfort, trying to piece together the clues. Her resolve was stronger than ever. She didn't know how, but she was determined to get to the truth. She would protect her daughter, even if she had to stand alone. She would find out what was really happening on that bus, and she would make sure Maya was safe. Little did Nina know, the answers she sought were closer than she realized, and the events set in motion by her determination would soon bring shocking revelations, ones that would force her to confront the harsh reality of her new community and test her family in ways she could never have imagined. Bookmark. The days passed slowly, each one heavier than the last, as Nina's sense of dread continued to grow. Every time Maya climbed onto the bus, Nina felt her heart twist with worry. She'd hoped for some breakthrough, some sign that her daughter would open up and share what was going on. But Maya remained distant, retreating into herself more with each passing day. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Nina was standing by the window, watching anxiously as she waited for the bus to return. She had laid out Maya's favorite snacks, hoping to lift her daughter's spirits with a small treat. But as the clock ticked past 4 and then 4:30, Nina's unease began to spiral into panic. It wasn't like the bus to be this late, and she hadn't received any message from the school or the bus service. By 5 o'clock, worry had consumed her completely. She called Malcolm, barely able to keep the fear out of her voice as she explained that Maya hadn't come home. "Maybe the bus just got delayed," he offered, though she could hear the tension in his voice. "I'll leave work now and be home as soon as I can. Call the school and see if they know anything." Nina hung up, her hands shaking as she dialed the school's main office. The receptionist informed her that all the buses had returned and staff were closing up for the day. "But my daughter isn't home," Nina cried, her voice trembling. "She has to be somewhere between the school and here. Can't you check?" The receptionist's voice was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Johnson, but if she doesn't turn up soon, I suggest you call the police." The words echoed in Nina's mind, intensifying her worst fears. Call the police. How had an ordinary school day turned into this nightmare? By the time Malcolm arrived home, Nina was in tears, frantically pacing the living room. Together, they called the bus depot, but the dispatcher confirmed that Mr. Miller had completed his route and returned on time. No one seemed to have any answers, and with each passing second, Nina's panic grew. Then, just as Malcolm was about to grab his car keys to start searching the neighborhood, the front door creaked open. They turned, their hearts stopping as they saw Maya standing in the doorway. She looked disheveled, her yellow skirt wrinkled, her pink shirt askew, and her usually neat braids fraying. "Maya!" Nina rushed over, wrapping her daughter in a tight hug, relief flooding her entire body. "Where have you been? We were so worried." Malcolm joined them, pulling both Nina and Maya into his arms. For a few moments, they held each other in a tangle of limbs, the fear of the past hours melting into an overwhelming sense of relief. But as Nina pulled back to look at Maya, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Maya's face was pale, her eyes wide and haunted, and she was trembling slightly, her small hands clenched into tight fists. "Maya, sweetheart," Nina said softly, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "What happened? Where were you?" Maya looked up at her parents, her lower lip trembling. In a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke the words that would shatter their world. The bus driver did it again. Silence filled the room as the weight of Maya's words sank in. Nina and Malcolm exchanged horrified glances, a storm of emotions surging within them: fear, anger, heartbreak, Nina guided Maya over to the couch, sitting down beside her and gently stroking her back. "Sweetie," she said, her voice steady but strained, "we need you to tell us everything." "What do you mean? The bus driver did it again? What has he been doing?" Maya hesitated, her small frame shaking as she looked down at her hands. After a long pause, she began to speak, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Miller. He doesn't like me," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "He says things when I get on the bus, things about how people like us don't belong here." Nina's heart broke as she listened to her daughter's words, the cruelty of what Maya had endured crashing down on her like a wave. She held Maya tightly, fighting back her own tears as she encouraged to continue. "He says I don't belong in this neighborhood. That our kind doesn't fit here," Maya continued, her voice cracking with emotion. "I didn't tell you because he said no one would believe me. He said people like us aren't welcome." Nina felt a surge of anger and guilt. Her worst fears had come true. Her daughter had been enduring a nightmare all along, and she hadn't done enough to protect her. But then Maya dropped another bombshell, one that sent chills down her parents' spines. "This isn't the first time he's left me stranded," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "He did it once before, a few weeks ago. He stopped the bus and told me to get out on a street far from home. He said if I told anyone, I'd regret it." Nina pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, her own tears falling freely now. Malcolm's face was twisted with rage, his fists clenched as he struggled to control his emotions. "And today?" Nina asked gently, her voice trembling. "What happened today?" Maya sniffled, wiping her eyes. "Today, he did it again. He stopped the bus and made me get off on some strange street. I didn't know where I was, and I was so scared. I walked and walked, trying to find my way home." Nina felt her heart shatter as she listened to her daughter's story. She looked at Malcolm, seeing her own horror mirrored in his eyes. In that moment, they both knew what they had to do. "Maya," Malcolm said softly, kneeling down in front of her and taking her small hands in his. "What Mr. Miller did was very wrong. It's not your fault, okay? None of this is your fault." Maya nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I thought he was right, that no one would believe me." Nina cupped her daughter's face in her hands, looking directly into her eyes. "Sweetheart, we believe you. And we're going to make sure that no one ever hurts you like this again." Malcolm stood, grabbing his phone. "We're calling the police," he said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "What Mr. Miller did is against the law. We're going to make sure he never does this to you or any other child ever again." Maya looked frightened, her wide eyes searching her mother's face. "But what if they don't believe me? What if Mr. Miller was right?" Nina hugged her daughter tightly, her voice filled with reassurance. "We believe you, Maya, and we'll make them believe you too. You are brave and strong, and we're so proud of you for telling us. We'll be right here with you every step of the way." As Malcolm dialed 911, Nina held Maya close, her mind racing. She thought about Sarah's hostile reaction in the park, the suspicious glances from neighbors since they'd moved in, and the difficulties they'd faced simply trying to fit in. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, that they might face disbelief, hostility, and even more challenges. But looking at her daughter's tear-stained face, Nina knew they had no choice. They had to fight, not just for Maya, but for every child who might face discrimination, fear, and injustice. They would stand up and make their voices heard, no matter the obstacles. And as the sound of sirens grew closer, Nina steeled herself for the battle that lay ahead. It would be long and it would be hard, but they would face it together as a family, and they would not rest until justice was served and their daughter was safe. Minutes after Malcolm placed the 911 call, 2 police officers arrived at the Johnson home. A tall, middle-aged white officer named Thompson and his younger partner, Officer Brooks, a black woman with a calm, compassionate demeanor, stepped into the living room, where Nina was still holding Maya close. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," Officer Thompson greeted them, his tone professional. "We received a call about a situation involving your daughter?" Malcolm nodded, gesturing for the officers to sit. "Yes, that's right. Our daughter Maya has been experiencing harassment by her school bus driver, Mr. Miller. He's not only verbally harassed her, but he's also left her stranded twice, miles from home. Officer Brooks knelt down beside Maya, offering a gentle smile. "Hi there, Maya. My name is Officer Brooks, and I'm here to help you. If you're comfortable, would you tell me a little about what happened, just as much as you're ready to share?" With a reassuring squeeze from her mother, Maya took a shaky breath and began recounting her story, her voice soft, determined. She described how Mr. Miller made hurtful comments, how he left her on unfamiliar streets, and how he'd threatened her if she told anyone. As Maya spoke, Officer Thompson took notes, his expression unreadable. When she finished, a heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Finally, Officer Thompson looked up, his face tight. "These are serious allegations, and we'll need to investigate thoroughly," he said carefully. "Mr. Miller has been driving kids in this neighborhood for many years, and he has a strong reputation here." Nina felt a surge of anger at his implication. "Are you saying you don't believe our daughter?" she asked, her voice sharp. Officer Brooks intervened quickly, her tone calm. "What my partner means is that we want to make sure we gather all the facts. This is a serious matter, and we're going to handle it with the attention it deserves." Malcolm, who had been silent, spoke up firmly. "We understand, officer, but we need to know that you'll take Maya's claims seriously. Our daughter has been traumatized, and we want to know you'll make this right." Officer Thompson nodded, though his face remained carefully neutral. "We'll need to speak with Mr. Miller directly, of course, and gather any other evidence we can. Were there any other students on the bus who might have witnessed what happened?" Maya shook her head, a fresh wave of tears brimming in her eyes. He always made sure I was the last one on the bus." Nina's heart clenched at the realization of how calculated Mr. Miller's actions had been. He'd carefully orchestrated Maya's isolation, ensuring that no one else would witness his cruelty. After the officers finished gathering information, Nina made a firm request. "We want to be there when you talk to him," she said, her voice steady. "We need to see this through." Officer Thompson hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, it's not protocol to have family members present during questioning." Officer Brooks looked at her partner, then nodded. "Understood. We can make an exception. You'll need to stay outside, but you're welcome to observe from a distance." Malcolm, Nina, and Maya climbed into their car and followed the officers down the quiet streets of their suburban neighborhood. Soon, they arrived at Mr. Miller's house, a neat, modest two-story home that looked shockingly ordinary for someone who'd caused their family so much pain. From their car, they watched as the officers approached Mr. Miller's front door and knocked. Mr. Miller answered, his face shifting from confusion to defensiveness as Officer Thompson explained why they were there. They couldn't hear the exchange, but Nina could see the anger in Mr. Miller's expression as he gestured with his hands, his face red with indignation. After what felt like an eternity, the officers returned to the Johnsons' car. Officer Thompson's face was grim as he spoke. "Mr. Miller denies all allegations," he reported, his tone neutral. "He claims he's never mistreated any child and that this is a misunderstanding." Nina's heart dropped. She opened her mouth to argue, to insist that her daughter was telling the truth when a voice behind her broke through the tense silence. "Wait." The woman hurrying toward them was another mother from the neighborhood, and Nina recognized her as Mrs. Jenkins, a member of one of the few other black families in the area. "I heard what was happening," she said, slightly out of breath, "and I need to tell you that you're not alone. My 2 kids had issues with Mr. Miller too. We didn't know what to do, so we just decided to drive them ourselves." Nina felt a surge of relief and gratitude as Mrs. Jenkins shared her story. She wasn't alone after all. Finally, someone else had come forward, someone who understood the pain and fear she'd felt. Officer Brooks turned to Mrs. Jenkins, her face solemn. "Ma'am, we'll need to take an official statement from you as well. This changes things significantly." Miss Mall, Jenkins nodded, her gaze meeting Nina's with an unspoken understanding. In that moment, they shared a connection, a shared experience of fear and determination to protect their children in a world that didn't always see them as equal. The next few hours were a blur. As word of the investigation spread, more families in the neighborhood came forward with similar stories of Mr. Miller's rude, discriminatory comments and intimidating behavior. Emboldened by the bravery of Nina and Mrs. Jenkins, other parents shared incidents they'd experienced or heard about over the years. The weight of these testimonies built a case that was impossible to ignore. By the time dawn broke, the Johnsons stood on their front porch, watching as Mr. Miller was led away in handcuffs. Relief washed over Nina as she saw him escorted into a police car, but there was also a bittersweet sadness, a reminder of the harsh reality her family had faced in the seemingly idyllic neighborhood. Malcolm joined her on the porch, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's over," he murmured softly. But Nina shook her head. "No," she replied, her voice filled with quiet determination. "This is just the beginning. We have work to do to make sure this never happens again. Not to Maya, not to anyone." In the days that followed Mr. Miller's arrest, the Johnson family became the center of a community in turmoil. Their story spread quickly, stirring up long-buried tensions and dividing opinions. Reporters appeared on their front lawn, eager for a sensationalized headline about a neighborhood scandal. "Racist bus driver terrorizes black child," one headline read, reducing their painful experience to a few shocking words. Malcolm's face was etched with worry one evening as he walked into the living room. "I just got off the phone with the lawyer," he said quietly. "The case is moving forward, and they may need Maya to testify." Nina's heart clenched at the thought of her daughter reliving her trauma in a courtroom. But she knew it might be the only way to ensure justice was served. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it," she replied, pulling Maya close. "For now, let's focus on helping her heal." Healing proved to be complex, not just for Maya, but for the entire community. The school board held an emergency meeting, and Nina and Malcolm attended, along with dozens of other concerned parents. The atmosphere was tense, with accusations flying back and forth. "We need better screening processes for all staff," one parent demanded, their voice filled with frustration. "This is an isolated incident," another argued. "We don't need to overhaul everything because of one bad apple." Finally, unable to hold her silence any longer, Nina stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't about one incident," she said firmly. "This is about creating a community where every child feels safe and valued. It's about addressing the biases and prejudices that allowed this to happen in the first place." Her words seemed to strike a chord. In the weeks that followed, the school established a diversity and inclusion committee. Parents, both black and white, joined forces to work on proposals for cultural sensitivity training, more diverse hiring practices, and a system for reporting and addressing concerns. At home, Nina and Malcolm focused on helping Maya heal. They found a therapist who specialized in working with children who had experienced racial trauma. Slowly, they began to see glimpses of their daughter's vibrant personality returning. One afternoon, as Nina was helping Maya with homework, there was a knock on the door. She opened it to find Sarah, the neighbor who had previously lashed out at her in the park. I owe you an apology," Sarah said, her eyes downcast. "I was wrong to dismiss your concerns. I'm sorry for how I treated you." Nina was taken aback, but after a moment she nodded. "Thank you for saying that," she replied softly. It was a small step, but an important one. As spring arrived, bringing fresh blooms to the neighborhood, Nina felt a cautious optimism. There was still work to be done, but she could see the beginnings of change, not just in her family, but in the community as a whole. They had faced darkness and come out the other side stronger and more united. Most importantly, they had shown Maya and everyone else the power of standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult. As the weeks turned into months, life slowly began to return to normal for the Johnson family. The case against Mr. Miller moved forward, gaining national attention as more families came forward with their own stories of mistreatment and discrimination. With the testimony from multiple families and evidence gathered by the police, Mr. Miller was eventually convicted. On the day of the verdict, Nina held Maya close, whispering, "You did it, sweetheart. You were brave, and you helped make sure he can't hurt anyone else." Maya looked up at her mother, a small but genuine smile spreading across her face. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. "All of us, together." At home, the Johnsons began to settle back into their routines. Nina and Malcolm continued to focus on supporting Maya's healing, finding ways to rebuild her confidence and help her feel safe again. The therapy sessions helped, as did the unwavering love and support from her parents. Slowly, they saw Maya's joyful spirit reemerge, her laughter filling the house once again. The community, too, was beginning to change. The school's new Diversity and Inclusion Committee worked to implement policies aimed at fostering a more inclusive environment for all students. Cultural sensitivity training for school staff was introduced, and cameras were installed on every school bus to ensure accountability and safety. An anonymous reporting system was also established, encouraging students and parents to speak up about any issues without fear of retribution. As the story of the Johnsons' experience spread, more people in the community began to open their hearts and minds. Neighbors who had once been distant or even openly hostile started to show small signs of support. On more than one occasion, Nina was stopped by other parents who wanted to express their gratitude, to tell her that her courage had inspired them to reflect on their own actions and biases. One sunny afternoon, while Nina was working in her front yard, she saw Sarah walking down the sidewalk. The same Sarah had once dismissed her concerns in the park. This time, however, Sarah stopped, offering a tentative wave. "Hi, Nina," she said, her voice a bit hesitant. "I just wanted to thank you for standing up for your daughter and for helping make changes in the school. I didn't see it before, but I'm beginning to understand why this is so important, so thank you." Nina felt a surge of mixed emotions but managed a genuine smile. "Thank you, Sarah. It means a lot to hear that." In that small exchange, Nina felt a sense of closure, a sign that, despite everything, there was hope for genuine understanding and change. With spring in full bloom, life felt fresh and new. Nina watched from the front porch one morning as Maya boarded the school bus, her face bright with excitement. The new driver, a warm and friendly woman of color, greeted each child with a smile as they climbed on board. Maya waved to her mom from the bus window, surrounded by a group of friends who greeted her with laughter and smiles. As the bus pulled away, Nina felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Their family had been through so much, but they had come out the other side stronger and closer than ever. They had faced fears, challenged assumptions, and pushed for change, not just for themselves, but for every family in the community. Malcolm joined her on the porch, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they watched the bus disappear down the street. "Think we're finally settling in here?" he asked, a soft smile playing on his lips. Nina leaned into him, her heart filled with gratitude. "Yeah, I think we are. We've got a lot of work left to do, but I feel hopeful. This place feels like home now." The Johnsons' journey had been filled with hardship, but it had also paved the way for growth, unity, and hope. Their courage had helped spark a change, not only in their community, but within their family as well. They'd shown Maya and everyone else that sometimes standing up for what's right meant facing hard truths and overcoming difficult challenges. In the following months, Nina and Malcolm continued to stay involved with the school's diversity committee, working alongside other parents to create a safer and more inclusive environment for every child. Maya, too, became a symbol of resilience and bravery among her peers. She flourished in her new school, her confidence growing as she saw the changes her courage had helped bring about. One evening, as the Johnson family sat around the dinner table, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "You know," Malcolm said thoughtfully, "I think all of this taught me that we're stronger than I ever realized. We can face anything together." Maya nodded, looking up at her parents with a sense of pride. "I'm glad we didn't leave," she said softly. "I like it here now." Nina reached across the table, squeezing her daughter's hand. "We're glad too, sweetie. We made this our home, and no one can take that from us." In the days that followed, life returned to a gentle rhythm. Maya continued to thrive, making friends, pursuing her interests, and laughing freely. Nina and Malcolm found joy in the small, everyday moments, family dinners, quiet evenings, and weekend outings. The trauma they'd faced had changed them, but it had also strengthened their bonds and deepened their love. As the sun set over their neighborhood one evening, Nina and Malcolm sat on the porch, watching Maya play in the yard with her friends. The soft sounds of laughter floated through the air, a reminder of the happiness they'd fought so hard to preserve. Nina took a deep breath, the crisp spring air filling her lungs. They had faced darkness, but they'd emerged stronger, determined to make their community a better place. And as she watched her daughter run through the grass, free and joyful, she knew they'd succeeded. They had created a future where Maya and every child could feel safe, valued, and at home. The Johnson family's journey reminds us all of the importance of courage and resilience, especially when it comes to protecting those we love. Their story teaches us that sometimes doing what's right means standing up, even when it's difficult. Through Nina's persistence, Lisa's bravery, and the family's unity, they sparked change, not just in their own lives, but in an entire community. They showed us that by confronting our fears, challenging injustices, and standing up for one another, we can create a world that's safer and more inclusive for everyone. Their story also reveals the impact of support and allyship. As more voices joined theirs, a simple act of courage led to broader acceptance, change, and growth for their community. This story is a powerful reminder that every voice matters, and by sharing our experiences, we help create a more understanding, compassionate world. If you found this story moving, we'd love to hear your thoughts. If you think it was good, comment with 1, and if you think it was truly great, let us know by commenting 2. Have a story of your own about courage, kindness, or standing up for what's right? Share it with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the inspiring stories we have coming up. And of course, let us know your thoughts about the Johnson family's journey in the comments section below.